Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. For more than 80 years, the Coutt's Morriarty 4-H camp in Derby has been providing summertime fun for the children of the region. Today's guest is the co-director of the camp, Jason Burrick. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me, Scott.
So, you've been providing summertime fun for 80 years. What year were you founded then? Well, for more than 80 years.
Yeah, well, so camp came into being in the early 1930s. It was originally started as a 4-H club by Flora Coutts, and it's been in continuous operation ever since then. So it was founded in the early 1930s, and the camp itself was built up over the next couple of years. So yeah.
So by Flora Coutts, where did the Morriarty come in then?
Marion Morriarty. It's one of the great things at camp is there's a big wooden glass cabinet there that has all these old scrapbooks that people have kept over the years, and one of them is Marion Morriarty's from her time as a camper there. She was a camper, one of the first campers at Coutts in the early 1930s. There's swatches of one of her first 4-H dresses she made, and all these old photographs and notes that she's kept. So she was one of the first campers, and then later on came to be a counselor there, and then eventually came on to run and steward camp through several decades, up until her passing in 1962, I believe.
How old have some of the visitors been that have come back just to see the camp, who camped there when they were kids?
Yeah, we get a lot of visitors coming through. We've got a big construction project going on right now where we're in the process of replacing that old lodge on Lake Salem, and we've gotten a lot of folks and seniors just driving in to kind of see what changes are afoot. They've read about it in the paper, and on a real regular basis, we get kids being dropped off for a week of camp whose parents were campers when they were younger. I've had a couple occasions where grandparents and even great-grandparents were dropping their grandchildren off who were campers there. And last summer, I think the oldest I can recollect is that there was a gentleman who was in his mid to late 70s who had been there as a camper in the 1937, 38, and was kind of sharing some stories about his time there.
So what do they say about it, these older campers?
Well, I mean, one of the things that they all share is how much bigger everything looks compared to when they were there as kids. And then beyond that, I mean, I think that the thing that they most share is just these great experiences and memories that they had. They all made really good friends. They remember just being outdoors, swimming in Lake Salem. I get a lot of stories about the swimming lessons that used to take place in Lake Salem, and I'm not sure if it's just people's recollection, but it seems like life was a little bit colder back then when they recollect the swimming lessons. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just been a real positive experience for generations of folks in the kingdom coming to camp.
When the bunkhouse was built, I believe, in the 1960s, you were saying, before that, did they have another bunkhouse or did they camp in tents?
That's a great question that I haven't really seen a whole lot written about. I mean, I know that early on that folks it was a camping experience. I mean, they came and stayed in tents, and I'm sort of envisioning sort of these cloth wall tent almost type looking things, but I've not seen any images of those in the old photographs. Certainly not the same Eureka and North Face tents that we're putting kids in for our trip camps these days.
Was it always a co-ed camp?
Oh wow, another really great question. I know that there were yes. I've seen images from the early 1930s where there were boys and girls attending the camp. Now, how they divided them up, I mean, right now it's real easy. We've got a bunkhouse with a girls' side and a boys' side, so it's real easy to keep them separate. I'm not sure how that was configured in the 1930s, but I'm guessing they were even more strict about it then than folks
are today. I was going to say, I bet you kids were still devious back then. No, you talk about you're making a new building. That means an end of an era is also coming for the camp.
An end of an era structurally, yeah. The original dining hall that has been in use since the early 1930s, we maybe 4 or 5 years ago had a couple builders come in and take a look at it. If you look at it from the inside, you can spruce it up and it looks fantastic. It's got these old cherry floors, some really great stuff about it. When you start looking at the roof line, you see some sagging going on and things like that. So again, we had some builders come out, took a look at it, and gave us some estimates on what it would take to kind of stabilize it so it would stand another 20, 30 years versus what it would take to rebuild. And it was clear based on the cost and also the flooding that happened last spring kind of nailed it. I mean, the water came up and horseshoed all the way around the building, covered the 4-H road, and it was the septic for that old building has been something that the state has been wishing that we would kind of figure out another solution to. So yeah, that building is going to come down, and we're rebuilding on the other side of the camp. Right. And so structurally, yeah, it'll be an end of an era, but I think philosophically, camp hasn't changed that much over the years, and I don't see the building coming down changing that basic philosophy of providing kids with, healthy meals and great outdoor experiences and good adult role models.
Now, when I look at this picture that the viewers are seeing now, I look at it, this is the building that's coming down, but when I look at it, I'm seeing all these trees. That doesn't look like that. What happened to those trees?
Yeah, Lake Salem has definitely changed over the years. I mean, it's still a beautiful lake to have a camp set on, but it was definitely 100% forested when that lodge went up in the 1930s, and it must have been some work to clear that swath there and to put up the new building. And over time, those trees came down. If you can see pictures of the building, like the one we're looking at from the 1930s, and then you can skip ahead and look at it from the 1950s. And by the 1950s, 15, 16 years later, there's not a tree left standing. So those either came down quick and early, or they came down over time. But sometime between the mid-1930s and 1950s, they were all gone.
So here's a later era photo, and you can see that there's less trees.
Yeah.
So, what are you going to do with the building? Are you going to use any of it just at least symbolically in the other building, or are you going to, you mentioned the cherry floors.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion around that, and quite honestly, our focus has been pretty heavy on getting this new building up and using before we ran into issues where the other one became either unsafe or just unusable. So we haven't come up with any firm plans yet. I mean, there's definitely been folks we have had a couple fundraising dinners in the old building, and there's been people who have long-standing affiliations with camp who have sort of had nostalgic feelings for this piece or that piece, has suggested ways that we can incorporate different aspects of the old building into the new one, and we do intend to do that. The cherry floors would be awfully nice. I'm not sure if that'll be able to be incorporated in the new one, but there's a lot of, I think, things hanging in the building that have more sentimental value than the floor, and we definitely plan on having displays in the new building that highlight the camp's history as well as the old building.
Do you have any, one thing I really like in some of these buildings is where, not just with camp, but where kids have written their names and dated it. Do you have anything in that building?
Right, sort of old-time
like
graffiti,
that?
right? Back
Right.
There are a lot of old plaques and things like that, and banners and things that have different old camp staff signatures and counselors from cabins and things like that, and awards that are both on display in that cabinet and hanging around in the old dining hall. And if you walk around the grounds of camp, you'll see lots of different signs marking, all the buildings are named after people who have contributed a lot to camp in the past, the trails similarly. So there's a lot of names as you walk around that kind of have to do or harken back to the camp's history, and those are more the kinds of things that we want to preserve. I think both to honor the contributions of those past folks, as well as just sort of just the cool historical aspect of those things themselves.
Right. Now, before you arrived, because you've only been at the camp just
about 6 years.
Yeah. 6 years. Before you arrived, back maybe 12, 15 years ago, when I used to work for the Chronicle, there was a really bad windstorm.
Yeah.
And at that time, there was even a question on just whether you could survive it. So you survived that, and are you thriving now, or?
Well, camp has moved through, I think, since that happened 98 or 99, I recollect, I've read some notes from that time period. Camp has moved through a couple difficult challenges, and that was definitely one of them. There was, from what I've read, there were literally hundreds of trees down all over camp, on buildings, laying on the grounds, and there was a lot of question as to whether camp would be able to open that summer. There was a huge effort. A lot of volunteers came out, some paid people came out to get camp up and running that summer, and were able to move through that. And then about 6-7 years ago, camp moved through some financial challenges, some debt, and just nationwide there's been a kind of a decline in enrollment at traditional summer camps, and so some declining enrollment issues. And so, there were some questions when we were originally asked to come on and start, my wife Annie and I asked to come on and start running things at campus, to whether financially we'd be able to kind of dig ourselves out of this hole. And we have, camp is definitely on solid ground, financially. Camp enrollment 6 years ago when we started was around I don't know, about 320 some campers are coming, and we're up, over 450 most summers now, and so things are looking good.
So some campers spend the night,
Indeed.
but some campers don't.
That's right. So we run a wide range of ages. Campers can come from as young as 3 years old and come to one of our half-day, we call them Bear Cub science camps, and then once they hit 6 to 12, they can sign up either to be a day camper where they're dropped off in the morning and picked up in the afternoon, or they can stay, once they turn 8, they can stay overnight, 8 to 12. And I think historically that age span has been a little bit longer, extended up into 15, and for a variety of reasons we decided to kind of separate out the teens, the sort of 12, 13, 14, and 15-year-olds, and provide some teen adventure camps that are more aimed at their sort of the speed that they're moving through the world, and so that's kind of how we're configured these days.
And your wife Annie is the co-director.
My wife Annie is the one who does everything hands-on on the ground. She runs the day-to-day at camp. She hires and manages the staff, oversees all the details going on there. I think one of the reasons camp is in a better position now than in what it was 5 or 6 years ago is 6 or 7 years ago, my wife and I were running a nonprofit called Siskin Ecological Adventures that we had started that does educational programs with area schools. And we recently merged. Siskin became umbrellaed under the Couts Morriarty nonprofit. And so, but by bringing kids to the camp year-round through school programs, I think it really increased exposure, reintroduced a lot of parents who maybe hadn't thought about camp in quite a while to camp. And I think that's been a big reason why camp numbers have come up. And so it's also just kept camp busy, hopping year-round, and helped kind of helped us keep costs. We haven't raised, I don't think, the cost of camp in 5 years, and we've been able to do that partly by expanding into more year-round programming.
Now, one thing I was just wondering is, you're talking about your numbers going up. Well, let's be real. Right now is to travel, gas is expensive.
No question.
And there's more people vacation locally. When I say locally, I mean like, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. They stay. Do you think there's been any benefit to the number of campers because people don't travel as much? Do you think some of these kids are there because the parents have had to rediscover what has been there all along?
That's a great question. We definitely have experienced, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years, an uptake in the number of parents asking us to help them facilitate carpooling. So I know that gas prices are definitely on folks' mind, and it wouldn't surprise me. I would say that one of the things that I've noticed is that we get a fair number of kids coming who are vacationing in the kingdom. So they have grandparents who still reside in the kingdom. Their parents have moved out, and are living in somewhere else in New England. They're coming back for a couple weeks each summer. Grandkids are staying with grandparents, and the grandparents are sending them to camp. So I'm not sure if it's exactly so much driven by local families not traveling further. I think our local family client base has stayed fairly constant. We get a lot of return campers. We get a lot of different entities in the area helping to sponsor kids coming to Couts. We still, I would say 80 to 85% of the kids who come are kids who reside in the kingdom, and the bulk of the rest are kids who have family connections in the kingdom. We get a handful coming down from Canada, some Canadian families looking for like an English language, like a fun English language immersion experience, but the bulk are Northeast Kingdom kids.
Now, I know at one point, back years ago, you also had, I'm not sure if you'd call them foreign exchange people working at the camp where they could learn about the United States, but the kids could also learn from them. Do you still do that? That
was prior to Annie and I running the camp, and I heard both positives and negatives about that. I think that one of the positives is exactly what you're describing. It's kids coming from other countries having a chance to experience our place. It's about kids from the Northeast Kingdom getting to meet and be introduced to folks from other parts of the world. I think that one of the challenges was these were like 18, 19-year-olds coming over primarily from Europe who had expectations of what it meant to be 18 and 19 in Europe, which isn't exactly the same expectations here. And so there were some issues around that. And then Annie and I also both feel really strongly that the best thing we can do for local kids is to put really strong, positive local high school and early college role models in front of them to show them like, hey, this kid went to Brownington School, went to graduated Lake Region, this is, and it is now attending college at UVM. I mean, these are good role models to put in front of kids. And so I would say we haven't hired anybody from out of the country since Annie and I have been there. We've hired, I think in the past 6 years, 2 or 3 folks who are from out of state. All the rest have been, folks from the Tri-County area, St. Johnsbury, Newport, Derby, and the surrounding towns.
I think what you just said is so correct about showing young people that if you're born and raised here, there's a negativism here sometimes that if you're born and raised here, you cannot succeed. I don't know what it's all about, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of homegrown people who have gone on to do great things with their lives, and a lot of them weren't born with silver spoons in their mouths. And I think the more people they can meet like that, and of course success is in the eyes of the beholder. If you're happy and you're paying your bills, that's successful. But to be realistic is we can all succeed. And I think young people need to hear that message more often, because I think throughout the generations, I think young people, no matter when, they get a bad rap. And I think the more people you can put in front of them, it's like, if you think of Dina Gray, who owns the East Side, she was born and raised a farm girl in Holland, and now she's the owner of the East Side. I grew up with Tina Carter Bliss, the owner of the Hoagies chain, and there's so many successful people here in the Northeast Kingdom, whether they were born here or whether they moved here. And, some of those people, successful people, do move away, but that's okay as long as they're happy. Yeah,
and I think that the other important thing, so there's 2 aspects of it for us. One is that these high school and college students are able to come back and they can really connect with our local kids. They've been swimming at Troy at the Four Corners. They've been to the same kind of places. They have a real sense of where these kids are coming from. They've been to the same schools. They can really connect both with the things that those young kids love about where they live, and they can also connect to, if those kids are having challenges and things, they can recognize those kind of things as well. And I think that one of the big challenges that we find is that some of these younger folks who then go on and are looking for jobs, whether it's straight out of high school or after graduating college, it's not an easy thing to do in our area, especially to find a job that can pay for housing and such. And so while we're not providing a whole lot of full-time employment, we really only have 3 full-time employees. We hire a lot of kids, kids just in high school looking for a great summer job where they can give back to the local community, and a lot of college students come to us and either work directly for us, or we're also partnering with the federal AmeriCorps program where they get an allowance, cash allowance, and they also get money towards their college tuition or student loans. And so we get lots of local kids who come back, and it's helping to move them through into the next stage of their life. And my hope is that at some point, as we continue to grow and expand, that some of those folks will come back and find full-time employment working with us.
So you've actually beaten the odds, because it's from being a history writer myself, I can tell you there were a lot of summer camps in this area throughout the generations, and but a lot of them have disappeared into the landscape now, but you survived.
The same is true nationwide. Summer camps have been closing left and right across the country. I think that, Couts had a leg up with its partnership with 4-H for a lot of years. I'm not exactly sure when or the details behind it, but at some point 4-H pulled out of the 2 camps that it owned in Vermont, and they had to either shut down or reincorporate as their own independent nonprofits. And I think that was another real tough period for camp to move through, and so that put it in a different kind of position. But yeah, we've been really blessed in terms of weathering some of this kind of storm that's been going on nationwide with camps as camp numbers have been declining, and largely due to the strong community support and the community focus of camp itself. I think we haven't. There are camps in New England that are older than us. There's plenty that are over 100 years old, but most of those are camps where the bulk of their campers are coming from across the country. They're pulling from a nationwide client base, and it costs several $1,000s to send your kid for a week there. We are, if not the least expensive, certainly one of the least expensive camps in all of New England. And with that commitment to serving local kids has meant that, as an example, we're building this new building. It's not easy to raise dollars around a big construction project like that, but boy, it's been really easy to get local contractors and businesses and everything to step up and provide materials at cost, to donate their services and their time. And those kind of things are crucial to a camp like Coutts continuing to exist.
And I think you were saying before that the town of Derby itself has been very generous.
Very huge. Yeah, the town of Derby. The old dining hall is actually on a piece of property owned by the town of Derby that we have had we go through a series of 10-year leases, and the town of Derby has both the voters, the different select boards have been incredibly supportive of camp, and as have Derby businesses, and families. It's been a great thing to be a part of. Both Annie and I, we reside right on the Charleston-Brighton line, and moving into running camp and getting to know all the great folks in Derby that have this affiliation with camp has been one of the real bonuses for us.
So why did you decide not to build your dining hall in the exact same place? Is it because of the water?
Primarily, there were a number of factors. So the camp itself, there's the dining hall is on the lakeside, and then there's a paved road, the 4-H road that goes there, and then the other end of camp is on the other side of that 4-H road. And camp itself owns the property, the acreage on the away from the lake. That the other land is owned by the town of Derby, and we've been in consultation with them as we've been moving ahead on this project. But the two main factors that influenced it were the septic. We probably could have renovated the existing building, but it was a pretty expensive proposition. And so taking it down and rebuilding would have meant a whole lot of re-permitting, and there was no way we were going to get a new permit for that. Like I said, the flooding 2 years ago really kind of nailed that decision. And then just small things like, by having the dining hall there, you have to cross that road a lot of times. It's a small road, it doesn't get a lot of traffic, but there are safety concerns and things like that. By having camp consolidated just on the one side with a central campus and opening that up and having it be a lakefront, I think long term is where camp needed to go.
Right. So Howard, I really have no idea about the structure in the sense of, do you have a board of directors that make the decisions, or do you have all the power?
No, yeah, definitely all the power does not reside with myself or my wife. Coutts is a 501c3 nonprofit, right? And it has a board of trustees. I tend to, when I explain it to folks, think of it like a school, right? The school has a school board, and it has a principal. Annie and I are a bit like the principal of the school, and the board is the one that oversees the camp itself. So there's no ownership of the camp, and it's an all-volunteer board, and it's comprised right now, we have 8 members on the board, and they're all folks from the local community. We have some area educators, we have some folks that have been on the board for a really long time. One of my favorites is Christy Aldrich.
Right.
Her family goes way back. Her husband's cousin, his aunt was Flora Coutts.
Right.
Christy is connected through the Morriarty side of things. So there's some great connections going on there. And so we have both folks who have been on the board just for a couple years, folks who have been affiliated with camp for nearly their entire lives. So it brings a nice perspective to what's going on there. But yeah, they ultimately have oversight of camp, both from a financial standpoint, from a making sure that everything is running as it should there, and then we work with them to make sure that we're providing great programmatic experiences for kids.
Now, when I think of summer camp, I think of swimming, boating, and maybe crafts. What really goes on at camp?
All of the above and then some, really. So one of the things the ways we've structured camp is that we like kids to be able to choose what they'd like to do. Some summer camps you move from like one block activity to another, and we recognize that when you've got 80 different kids there of a span of ages, some are much more craft oriented, some are just that sort of kid who in school is ADHD labeled or whatever and bouncing off the walls, and they want to be in motion the whole time. So camp is structured in these different blocks of time, and kids can go canoeing and kayaking on the lake. We have swim time on the lake. We have fishing on the lake. We've got a big 30-foot climbing tower with like a zip line and other high ropes elements. We have archery, arts and crafts. We've taken one of the buildings and turned it into a dedicated wood shop where kids make. We cut and mill cedar and balsam on the property, and kids make everything from catapults to bird feeders to hands-on wood products right there at camp. Gosh, I know we got big soccer fields. We have field games. Just a whole gamut of activities, really.
So does everything take place on the premises, or do you go
Most
elsewhere?
Everything takes place on the camp. The one exception is our teen camps. trying to create, we have kids who have come to camp, some of them since they were 6 years old, and they're now like 13 years old and looking for something to take it to the next level. And so those kids spend part of their time at camp. For example, this summer we've partnered with the Northern Forest Canoe Trail.
Right.
And are offering 2 camps for kids where we will leave camp and we'll be paddling different local sections of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, so sections of the Clyde River, the Nulhegan, maybe a section of the Connecticut. And so basically, but this idea is still the same, exposing kids to local resources and opportunities to be outside and doing cool stuff.
So we've talked a lot about the camp, and maybe some of the viewers are thinking, boy, I'd like my child to go there this summer. Is it too late?
No, absolutely. There's still space available. Those Northern Forest Canoe Trail programs that I talked about, those are filling up. One of them's completely full and one's very close. But all the rest of our camps still have space. I hear talk of folks that run camps down in the Burlington area that they fill up by like March. We're definitely not like that. Most weeks there will be space in the camp right up close to when the week starts.
Right.
So we'd definitely be excited to have some folks to give us a call and sign up.
So how can they contact you?
They can get a hold of us through our website, which is siskincouts.org. Or they can also give us a call. Our home and work cell is 673-5638. They can download all the registration information they would need on the website, or they can give us a call and we'll pop something in the mail to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you work with the schools at all? Like, do you put information out to them who then pass it on?
That's become a big part of what we do, and we're excited, again, both about how that has helped support camp from getting, on some sound financial footing, as well as just kind of increased our ability to have positive experiences for local kids, to really connect them to a sense of place and appreciate the local traditions and the great things about the kingdom. So we do last year we did about 550 school programs, a mix of kids coming to us. Sometimes we go to them after school programs, full day field trips, overnight trips on the Connecticut River, hikes up local peaks. So we're keeping plenty busy year round. We just did 52 different programs this month of April, despite the rain and the never shifting weather going on.
I don't know if we've talked about this, but how many days is it a week or two that people stay over, the campers stay overnight?
We run things 1 week at a time. So the kids sign up, they get dropped off Sunday if they're going to do overnight Sunday afternoon, they get picked up Friday afternoon. And then there's that Saturday, which is a little bit of breathing room for us to kind of get reorganized and reset up for the next week. Most of the kids who come to camp come for a single week, but there's each summer there's a number of kids who come for multiple weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
So you only have about 2 more minutes left. What more would you like the viewers to know about the camp?
I think the biggest thing that I'd like to leave folks with, is this idea that that camp has been and will always be, very focused on this community. I think that we've found ways to make that work, both in terms of serving local kids and families and doing it affordably. And we are just immensely grateful, both Annie and I, for the opportunity to be able to step into this really amazing tradition, and for just the continued support of the community. Building this new building has been a huge undertaking for us, and it's really opened our eyes to the amount of support that exists out there in the community. There has been so much generosity, so much time and effort and advice and just hard work donated towards that project, and we're just grateful and humbled, like I said, to be a part of it. So,
right. Are there any buildings still left that are as old as the ones you're taking down, or? There's
not. Yeah, that's the oldest building. All the rest of them were built sometime. The bunkhouse is the next oldest building, built in the 1960s, and that appears to be in still really solid shape. We're hoping to get another 30, 40 years out of that. All the rest of them were built late 60s to early 80s.
So you said you're hoping to have the bunkhouse stay for another 30 or 40 years, so you'll be around then to start the fundraising effort there.
Well, we'll see. I'm definitely working into my 40s here, and we'll see another 30 or 40 years. That'd be fantastic. I would encourage folks, come on out and check it out. The new building is very close to being open. We've made a lot of efforts to make sure it still looks like classy, but looks like a camp, and if I'm still there in 30 years and you're still kicking in 30 years, maybe we'll sit down at these tables and talk about it.
Well, better yet is, NEK TV also goes on the road, and you ought to this summer talk to Todd and Brandy about coming on the road and visiting you at the camp and show the rest of the world what Couts Morriarty 4-H camp is all about.
I'd love to get Todd up there, climbing up that tower and going down the zip line.
That would be great.
I think your viewers would really enjoy seeing that.
Okay, I want to thank you for coming on today. It was a pleasure hearing what the 4-H camp is all about. And thank you to the listeners for tuning in today.